Hey guys, tonight we saddle up and ride straight into the dusty, rowdy, and occasionally downright questionable world of Wild West entertainment, where boredom was the real outlaw and people would do just about anything to lasso a good time. Out here on the frontier, survival was tough, the whiskey was cheap, and hygiene was, let's just say, optional. So when the chores were done, the cows were branded, and the revolvers were polished, what did folks do for fun? Well, brace yourself, because the answer ranges from snake oil sales pitches to watching your neighbor swing from a rope, with plenty of gambling, clowns, and cockfighting thrown in for good measure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this little corner of chaos I call history. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Because somewhere out there, I just know someone is watching this at 3 a.m., wondering if they too would have paid money to see a bearded lady wrestle. A dwarf under a circus tent. Now dim the lights, maybe pour yourself a whiskey neat, preferably without the snake oil, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Cowboys, gamblers, and settlers may not have had TikTok or Netflix, but they had rodeos, medicine shows, and enough bizarre sports to make you wonder if boredom is the most dangerous weapon humanity has ever faced. Welcome to the Wild West, where fun was just as unpredictable, messy, and occasionally deadly as the frontier itself. Part 1, Medicine Shows, the Wild West infomercial. If you've ever flipped through late-night TV and found some guy shouting about how his juicer will solve all your problems, congratulations, you've basically time-traveled to the Wild West. Because back then, medicine shows were the original infomercials, only with more whiskey, questionable science, and significantly higher risk of diarrhea. Picture this, a dusty frontier town, the kind where tumbleweeds have more social life than the locals. Suddenly, a brightly painted wagon rattles in, pulled by tired horses and decorated like a carnival on wheels. Out jumps a man in a top hat who looks like he failed magician school, but still has dreams. He announces that he's got the cure for every single thing that's wrong with your body, your cousin's body, and probably your horse too. Snake oil, the universal fix. Got headaches? Take some. Arthritis? Take more. Can't sleep? Drink the whole bottle and you'll sleep forever. The snake oil name wasn't completely random. At first, it did come from Chinese medicine that used actual oil from water snakes, which had some health benefits. But leave it to American salesmen to swap in whatever was cheaper. Alcohol, turpentine, morphine, or random herbs. Basically, the stuff could get you drunk, high, or run into the outhouse, faster than a jackrabbit in a coyote chase. Did it cure your rheumatism? No. Did it cure your constipation? Oh, absolutely, sometimes explosively. But these shows weren't just about selling bottles of Kickapoo Indian Sagwa, a real product, by the way, which was basically a laxative cosplaying as Native American wisdom. They had entertainment. Imagine strongmen ripping apart horseshoes while some guy in a fake professor coat explained why the miracle tonic could heal your liver and your soul. Meanwhile, in the audience, a planted sick person would dramatically rise from their seat after one sip shouting, "Hallelujah, I can walk again." The crowd cheered, the salesman got richer, and the local doctor probably sighed into his whiskey. One of the biggest brands, Kickapoo Indian Medicines, leaned hard into the Native Americans' secret cure gimmick. Their star product, Kickapoo Indian Sagwa, was advertised as a centuries-old herbal remedy. The truth? It was herbs, animal fat, and alcohol stirred together until it looked mystical enough. The slogan could have been, "You won't know what it fixes, but you'll sure feel something." And let's be honest, the audience wasn't stupid. People weren't really expecting immortality in a bottle. They came for the show. Frontier life was boring. If you'd been staring at sagebrush and cows for 6 months, watching a mustached con man wrestle a bear while yelling about digestive health was basically Netflix. People wanted the spectacle, the music, the fire breathing, and maybe, just maybe, the chance that this strange liquid would actually make Grandpa stop complaining about his joints. Of course, not everyone was a fan. Reformers called medicine shows immoral, dishonest, and dangerous, which was fair because half the stuff could kill you. But the traveling salesman laughed all the way to the bank because buyer beware was basically the national motto of the Wild West. And if a few folks ended up a little tipsy or very much in need of a new outhouse, well, at least they had a good story to tell. So yeah, the next time you see a commercial claiming their supplement will make you younger, stronger, and sexier, just know you're watching the direct. Descendant of a guy in 1880s Kansas yelling, "Step right up, folks, one bottle cures everything but death." Part 2, Living Picture Shows. When Netflix was people, standing still before TikTok, before Instagram thirst traps, and even before the invention of actual movies, the Wild West had its own weird brand of entertainment. Living picture shows. Imagine this. Instead of binge watching a series from your couch, you sit in a creaky wooden chair in some makeshift theater and watch actual people stand there, pretending to be paintings. That's it. Human statues. Congratulations. You're cultured. It started innocent enough. In the early 1800s, these tableaux vivants were meant to be educational. A group of poor actors and models would dress up like famous paintings or sculptures, freeze in place while music played, and hope nobody sneezed. You'd look at them and say, "Ah, yes, I too understand fine art now. This is definitely not awkward." It was basically PowerPoint, but with humans and corsets. But of course, humans being humans, things got spicy fast. What started as "Behold the noble Venus de Milo" quickly turned into "Behold, a lady in not a lot of clothing." Yep, by the mid-19th century, living pictures had morphed into one of the racier entertainments of the Wild West. Add some dramatic lighting, a violinist, and a model who was definitely wearing less than your Sunday preacher would approve of, and suddenly this was the hottest ticket in town. Naturally, moral crusaders freaked out. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, who already had beef with alcohol, decided they also hated this art meets burlesque trend. They claimed it was degrading, vulgar, and the end of civilization as we know it. To be fair, if you'd spent your whole life yelling at people not to drink whiskey, a half-naked painting probably felt like a personal attack, but not everyone agreed. Some argued these shows actually improved the general public's knowledge of art. Sure, maybe you came for the risque version of Cleopatra, but you accidentally learned who Cleopatra was. That's education, baby. And the audience? Oh, they were eating it up. Cowboys who hadn't seen a woman dressed in silk since forever suddenly became experts in art criticism. Local papers ran heated debates. Was it immoral smut or was it culture? Spoiler, it was both. But when you're living in a dusty mining camp where the biggest excitement is poker night, a chance to see a living version of a scandalous painting was worth every nickel. One could argue this was the Wild West's first content controversy. The 1880s equivalent of parents in the 1980s banning hair metal albums. Only instead of Twisted Sister making your mom nervous, it was a model pretending to be Venus rising from the sea. Same outrage, different century. In a way, these living picture shows were the awkward bridge between traditional theater and what would eventually become film. They had music, staging, costumes, and a flair for the dramatic. The only thing missing was dialogue. But hey, if you're going to stand still for 10 minutes while pretending to be a Greek statue, you probably don't want to talk anyway. So, what can we learn here? 1. People in the Wild West would pay good money to watch literally anything that broke the monotony of ranch life. 2. Every generation thinks the next one is morally bankrupt for enjoying slightly risque entertainment. And 3. Humans. have always been extremely talented at inventing new excuses to look at each other in minimal clothing while still calling it educational. So yes, living picture shows were art. Questionable art, sure, but art nonetheless. And if you squint hard enough, you might even call them the Netflix of the 19th century, except with way worse buffering. Part 3, Minstrel Shows. When racism took center stage, if you thought the Wild West was all gunfights, poker, and heroic standoffs, surprise! Sometimes the entertainment was just cringe. Welcome to minstrel shows, the most popular form of entertainment in 19th century America, and also one of the most uncomfortable to talk about today. Here's the setup. A group of white performers would smear burnt cork or shoe polish all over their faces, slap on exaggerated costumes, and then sing, dance, and tell jokes while pretending to be caricatures of black people. Yeah, that was the act. No plot twist, no moral lesson, just straight up racist parody. If you're cringing right now, congrats, you're officially a decent human being. But in the 1800s, these shows were huge, like boy band in the 90s huge. Whole towns would gather to watch comedy, routines full of stereotypes. The acts would usually involve banjos, slapstick humor, and dialogue that mocked African American speech and culture, and audiences ate it up because apparently if you didn't have Netflix, racism was the next best thing. Now here's where it gets messy. Not all minstrel performers were white. In fact, many black musicians, singers, and actors got involved, sometimes because it was the only way to get work in show business at all. The father of the blues, W.C. Handy, and the legendary Ma Rainey, the mother of the blues, both performed in minstrel circuits. Even James Bland, one of the greatest black songwriters of the 19th century, worked in this world. Why? Because, and despite being toxic, minstrel shows were one of the few platforms where black performers could actually showcase musical talent, and audiences noticed. Some shows had genuinely good music, and in a time when entertainment was limited, that meant something. Bland, for example, became famous for his compositions, attracting not just white audiences, but also black ones who came to hear his artistry, even if the context was messy. This duality is what makes minstrel shows such a bizarre historical phenomenon. On one hand, they reinforced disgusting stereotypes. On the other hand, they became a pipeline for some of the most influential musical talent America has ever produced. Without minstrel shows, we might not have the roots of blues, jazz, and eventually rock and roll. History is annoying like that. Sometimes progress crawls through mud. And let's not forget, this wasn't just a Southern thing. Minstrel shows traveled across the U.S., including the Wild West. Cowboys and settlers, after a long day of cattle wrangling or gold panning, would happily pay a nickel to watch a show that combined music, comedy, and deeply questionable makeup. Choices. From today's perspective, minstrel shows score about a 9.5 out of 10 on the racist Richter scale. But back then, they were mainstream, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe of the 19th century, only instead of superheroes saving the day, it was white dudes in blackface making jokes about stealing chickens. So what do we take away from this? First, humans have always had a spectacular ability to laugh at the expense of others, especially when society says it's okay. Second, sometimes even the worst environments produce incredible art because talent finds a way to shine through the muck. And third, if you're going to do historical cosplay, maybe don't reach for the shoe polish. So yeah, the Wild West wasn't just saloons, poker tables, and shootouts at high noon. Sometimes the night's big entertainment was a minstrel show, a messy contradictory mix of racism, music, comedy, and culture. It was the era's guilty pleasure, except the guilt part only showed up about 100 years later. Part 4, Boxing. Punch first, ask questions? Never. If you think UFC fights today are brutal, just wait until you hear what the Wild West called entertainment. Welcome to 19th century boxing, a sport where men stripped down, threw hands, with no gloves and called it a night only after one of them had lost enough teeth to pay the dentist's rent. Boxing in the Wild West wasn't some underground thing, this was prime-time entertainment. And it wasn't just locals swinging at each other after too much whiskey. Nope, the sport got a major boost from immigrants, especially the Irish, who brought their long tradition of bare-knuckle fighting across the Atlantic. Think of it as cultural exchange, except instead of trading recipes, they traded concussions. Enter Jim Mace, a British boxer who showed up in America in the mid-1800s and basically became the sport's hype man. Known as the father of modern boxing, Mace wasn't just brawling for the sake of brawling. He introduced technique, footwork, defense, all the stuff that separates a boxer from a guy who just waves his fists like windmills. He traveled through California and Nevada, putting on exhibitions that made settlers realize, hey, maybe watching two sweaty men punch each other repeatedly is a great night out. And because this was the Wild West, boxing naturally got tied up with legendary frontier figures. In 1869, two fighters, John Shancy and Mike Donovan, faced off in a match refereed by none other than Wyatt Earp. Yes, that Wyatt Earp. The guy who usually settled disputes with a revolver apparently also moonlighted as a boxing referee. Because in the Wild West, you weren't really living unless you had at least 3 side hustles. These weren't your standard 12-round matches either. Bare-knuckle bouts could drag on for hours, turning fighters into human punching bags until someone finally gave up. The audience, they loved it. Imagine ranch hands, miners, and cowboys all crammed together, yelling and placing bets, while someone inevitably shouted, "Knock his lights out!" Even though electric lights weren't exactly common yet. By the late 19th century, boxing had gotten too popular. Prize fighting was everywhere, and lawmakers started panicking. What happens when you mix alcohol, gambling, and men punching each other for cash? Violence, corruption, and chaos. So in 1896, the federal government stepped in with an anti-prize fighting bill, which of course didn't stop anyone. It just made the fights slightly more illegal, which in the Wild West translated to more exciting. And here's the kicker. Boxing was dangerous as hell. No gloves, no weight classes, no medical checks. You didn't need to make weight, you just needed to make it out alive. One bad punch could break a jaw, shatter an eye socket, or end a career. But that didn't matter to spectators. For folks living in dusty frontier towns, this was better than theater. Why sit through Shakespeare when you could watch someone literally get punched into next week? Looking back, boxing in the Wild West was less about the sport and more about the spectacle. It wasn't polished, it wasn't safe, but it was raw, chaotic, and perfectly suited to a society where danger was part of daily life. After all, if you were already dodging rattlesnakes, barroom brawls, and the occasional outlaw, what's one more bloody fistfight between friends? So yes, when people in the Wild West wanted entertainment, sometimes they didn't go for music, or plays, or even gambling. They just wanted to watch two guys punch each other until one of them couldn't stand up, because nothing says Friday night fun like blood on the floor and Wyatt Earp calling the shots. Part 5, Hangings, the OG public spectacle. Nobody asked for. You know how people today line up for concert tickets or wait hours to see the latest Marvel movie? Well, in the Wild West, they lined up for executions. Yep, public hangings weren't just justice being served. They were the frontier's version of a blockbuster event, complete with crowds, snacks, and probably at least one drunk guy yelling, "Drop 'em already!" Let's set the scene. It's 1870-something, and word spreads that the local outlaw is about to meet the business end of a rope. Suddenly, the whole town transforms. Farmers leave their fields, saloon girls ditch their shifts, and kids get the day off school. Why? Because nothing says family fun like watching a man dangle from a scaffold. It wasn't just justice. It was entertainment. Take William Van Horn, for example, a convicted killer from Kansas. In 1863, he was hanged in Colorado in front of at least 500 spectators. That's more people than some frontier towns even had. Imagine traveling for hours just to watch a dude's neck snap. Talk about commitment. Or William Wilson, a ranch hand from New Mexico. In 1875, he was hanged before a massive, angry crowd. People didn't just watch, they participated emotionally, yelling, jeering, and cheering when justice was served. It was the 19th century equivalent of watching pay-per-view boxing, except the main event didn't get a rematch. And then there was the legend himself, George Malladin, nicknamed the Prince of Hangmen. Sounds like a bad heavy metal stage name. But nope, this was a real guy. He worked as the executioner for Judge Isaac Parker in Arkansas. Between 1873 and 1876, Malladin hanged 22 men across 7 public executions, and he didn't do them one at a time. Oh no, sometimes he dropped 5 or 6 guys at once, like some twisted party trick. Imagine the crowd reaction. 2 for 1. Special, what a deal! These hangings were advertised in advance. Posters went up, people traveled miles to attend. Entire families showed up with picnic baskets like it was a Sunday outing, and after the event, folks bought souvenirs. That's right, execution as merch. If Etsy had existed back then, someone would have been selling limited edition Saw the hanging of 1875 mugs. But wait, it gets darker. If you couldn't make it to the actual hanging, no problem. Sometimes the authorities put the body on display afterward so everyone could still gawk. When outlaw Jesse James was killed, in 1882, hundreds of people lined up to view his corpse like it was some kind of morbid meet and greet. Honestly, it was like the frontier version of waiting in line to see Brad Pitt, except Brad Pitt wasn't dead and full of bullet holes. Now, not everyone loved this spectacle. Religious leaders and reformers argued that public hangings were barbaric and turned justice into a carnival. And well, they were right. But in a world where Netflix didn't exist, rodeos were still developing, and saloon poker could only hold your attention for so long. Hangings filled that weird entertainment. Void, looking back, it's easy to cringe at the idea of crowds cheering over executions. But that's the Wild West for you. Justice and entertainment were often the same thing. Outlaws paid the ultimate price, towns got their closure, and the crowd went home saying, "Well, that was fun. See you at the next one." So yes, public. Hangings in the Wild West were grim, grotesque, and undeniably popular. A reminder that sometimes humanity's sense of fun has always been just a little messed up. Part 6, Gambling, when family fun night involved pistols under the table. If there's one thing the Wild West loved more than whiskey, it was gambling. Seriously, if you were breathing and had at least one coin in your pocket, someone was ready to bet against you. Cowboys gambled, miners gambled, soldiers gambled. People probably gambled on whether or not the preacher would fall asleep during his own sermon. And it wasn't just small bets. The frontier had entire saloons and gambling halls dedicated to the fine art of losing your paycheck in record time. Picture it, smoky room, piano playing, a haze of cigar smoke thick enough to choke a buffalo, and men hunched over tables with cards, dice, and the occasional sidearm resting within arm's reach. Because in the Wild West, folding didn't always mean quitting the game. It could mean ducking before a bullet hit you. The king of card games? Poker. Oh yes, that same poker you still play today, except with fewer snacks and a lot more chance of dying. Legendary figures like Wild Bill, Hickok, and Doc Holliday were famous not just for their guns, but for their poker faces. Hickok, for example, literally died while playing poker. Shot in the back while holding what became known as the dead man's hand, aces and eights. Talk about commitment to the game. Smart gamblers had a trick. Always sit with your back to the wall. That way, nobody could sneak up behind you to peek at your cards or, shoot you in the head. Because, yes, poker nights sometimes ended with someone flipping the table and reaching for their revolver. Imagine your modern. Game night ending with Aunt Karen pulling a Glock over a bad hand of Uno. Same energy, but poker wasn't the only game in town. There was Faro, a fast-paced card game that was actually more popular than poker in its heyday. Then you had blackjack, monte, and euchre. Basically, if it had cards, the frontier turned it into an excuse to lose money. And if you didn't like cards, no problem. Betting on horse races, shooting contests, cockfights, or literally anything was fair game. Someone probably bet on whether or not the bartender would drop a glass before midnight. Professional gamblers were like the rock stars of the West. They traveled from town to town, sharp-dressed, sharp-eyed, and always ready to clean out the locals. Some were respected for their skill, others were despised for fleecing hard-working settlers out of their cash. Either way, they never went hungry. Unless, of course, they were caught cheating. Then they might go hungry because they were hanging from a tree. Now, society was split on gambling. Reformers and church folks saw saloons and gambling halls as dens of sin, filled with corruption, violence, and moral decay. To be fair, they weren't wrong. Mixed whiskey, cash, and loaded pistols, and you're basically begging for chaos. But others saw gambling as good for business. After all, saloons brought in customers, gambling halls created jobs, and successful gamblers sometimes reinvested their winnings back into the town. It was capitalism, frontier style. Looking back, gambling in the Wild West wasn't just about the money, it was about the thrill. Life on the frontier was tough, dangerous, and often boring. A few rounds of poker offered excitement, drama, and the slim possibility that tonight might be the night you struck it rich. Or, the night you got shot over a bad bluff. Same thing, really. So next time you lose $20 playing cards with your friends, just remember, at least you didn't. Lose your horse, your gun, and your life in one hand of poker. That's progress, folks. Part 7. Circuses and Sideshows. The Wild West goes full weird. Forget Netflix. Forget TikTok. If you were living in the Wild West and wanted something truly bizarre, you went to the circus. And if the circus didn't scratch your itch for strange, well, that's what sideshows were for. Because nothing says family entertainment like elephants doing tricks, clowns falling over themselves, and some guy yelling, "Come see the bearded lady," at the top of his lungs. Let's start with the main act, the circus. When one of these shows rolled into town, it was like Beyoncé going on tour. People lost their minds. The wagons alone were a spectacle. Hundreds of performers, cages of exotic animals, and enough equipment to make a small town wonder, where the hell are we supposed to put all this? The setup itself became part of the show, with locals standing around watching elephants being led through the streets like it was the most exciting thing to ever happen. Spoiler, it probably was. The acts were classic. Horses performing elaborate routines, acrobats flying through the air, clowns, the creepy kind, not the birthday party kind, trying not to trip over their own feet. And then there were the animals, lions, tigers, and elephants performing tricks that definitely made the frontier folks forget they were living in a world where indoor plumbing was still a dream. But if the circus was the main course, the sideshow was the dessert. And by dessert, I mean something between fascination and nightmare fuel. Freak shows, as they were called back then, showcased wonders of nature. Conjoined twins, people with dwarfism, the infamous bearded ladies, and basically anyone whose body didn't fit society's normal mold. The ads promised astonishing marvels and human curiosities, and people paid good money to stare. Was it exploitative? Oh, absolutely. But back then, moral debates weren't really the main concern. Most folks just wanted to gasp, laugh, or whisper, "How does she grow a beard better than me?" And of course, the circuses grew huge. With the expansion of the railroad, they could move across the country with terrifying efficiency. turning the entertainment business into, well, big business. By the late 1800s, Barnum and Bailey Circus was the superstar of the circuit, with over 1,200 performers and hundreds of animals. They pitched massive tents that could fit thousands of spectators. Imagine a whole dusty frontier town vanishing into a canvas arena to watch people juggle flaming torches while standing on horseback. That's not just entertainment, that's escaping reality. For the people of the Wild West, circuses and sideshows weren't just fun. They were a portal to another world. You could live in a shack made of mud and wood, spend your days milking cows and avoiding rattlesnakes, but for one magical night, you got to see elephants march in a parade and acrobats defy gravity. And then you went home and stepped on a rattlesnake anyway. Balance. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Some reformers argued that circuses were morally corrupt, distracting people from real work and exposing children to sinful spectacles. But honestly, when your alternative was sitting at home listening to Pa talk about crop prices again, sin sounded a lot more fun. So yeah, circuses and sideshows in the Wild West were big, loud, weird, and often problematic. But they were also unforgettable. For a society that lived every day balancing between survival and boredom, the circus was a welcome break. And if you went home with nightmares about clowns or questions about how a guy could swallow a sword without dying, hey, that was part of the ticket price. Part 8, Sports. Because even cowboys needed a workout. When you picture the Wild West, you probably imagine dusty streets, poker tables, and the occasional gunfight at high noon. But believe it or not, people also did sports. Yeah, actual physical activities that didn't involve drinking whiskey or shooting at someone's hat for fun. Turns out, even cowboys like to show off their athletic side as long as it came with bragging rights, betting opportunities, or the chance to punch someone in the face. Let's start with the basics, hunting and marksmanship competitions. If you could kill a deer from 50 yards with a rifle, you were a hero. If you missed, congratulations, you were dinnerless and ridiculed by your neighbors. These contests weren't just about survival, they were about ego. Men lined up with rifles, shot at targets, or sometimes each other's hats, and the winner strutted away like he just won an Olympic medal. Then there were foot races. Yes, before football and basketball, people literally just ran. Cowboys, trappers, miners, men who spent most of their time on horseback decided to see who could move fastest on their own 2 feet. Spoiler, running in cowboy boots was probably about as graceful as watching a drunk uncle dance at a wedding. But hey, people bet money on it, so everyone was entertained. Of course, the Wild West couldn't stop at running. Things had to get violent, which brings us to wrestling matches and fist fights. 2 men would square up, sometimes in a ring, sometimes just in the dirt outside the saloon, and start grappling. It was strength, pride, and testosterone rolled into one sweaty package. Winning meant glory. Losing meant waking up with a black eye and trying to explain to your wife why your shirt was ripped in half. Other sports were, let's call them creative. Log rolling, axe throwing, dog fighting, cockfighting. If it moved, someone in. The Wild West had probably tried to race it, fight it, or throw it at a target. Imagine a Saturday afternoon in town. One guy's rolling on a log in the river, while another is tossing axes at a tree, and meanwhile, a crowd is screaming at 2. Roosters trying to peck each other to death. Yup, that's frontier entertainment for you. And then came the slightly more civilized stuff. Bowling actually became popular in the mid-19th century. Picture miners and ranchers knocking down pins after a long day, probably arguing over whether the balls should be greased with bacon fat. And if you live near snow, lucky you, skiing made its way to the frontier because apparently strapping wood to your feet and careening down icy hills was considered a good time. But the crown jewel of sports in the Wild West? Baseball. In 1869, the Cincinnati Red Stockings America's first professional baseball team, went on tour out west. Imagine the hype. Frontier folk who'd never seen professional athletes suddenly watching guys in matching uniforms smack balls across a field. For many settlers, this was like seeing the Rolling Stones roll into town 100 years early. Baseball quickly caught on, becoming a rare example of Eastern civilized culture, making it big on the frontier. So yeah, sports in the Wild West were a mix of survival skills turned into contests, violent brawls turned into athletics, and the occasional polished professional show like baseball. At the end of the day, it didn't matter if you were rolling logs, throwing punches, or cheering for the Red Stockings. Sports gave frontier folks an outlet. Life was tough, boring, and often deadly. Sometimes you just needed to run around in boots, throw an axe at a stump and yell, "Beat that, neighbor!" And honestly, that's the most relatable thing about the Wild West. Part 9. Rodeos and Wild West Shows. When cowboys became celebrities. If you think the Wild West was all cattle drives and poker nights, think again. When cowboys weren't busy wrangling longhorns or getting shot at by outlaws, they were turning their daily grind into entertainment. Yep, welcome to Rodeos and Wild West Shows, where the skills that once kept cattle from running away became the hottest ticket in town. It all started small. Cowboys bored out of their minds after months of herding cows across endless plains would challenge each other. Bet I can rope that steer faster. Bet I can stay on that bronco longer. Next thing you know, you've got half a saloon gathered outside, cheering while two drunk ranch hands wrestle with a furious horse. And just like that, the rodeo was born. At first, these contests were casual, more about bragging rights than trophies. But soon towns realize, wait a minute, people are willing to pay to watch some poor fool nearly get trampled by a bull? Jackpot. By the late 1800s, rodeos were no longer just cowboy showdowns. They were full-blown events with posters, prize money, and bragging rights that stretched across states. Prescott, Arizona, and Cheyenne, Wyoming were some of the first towns to make rodeo competitions official. And trust me, the bragging rights from winning a bronco riding contest lasted longer than most marriages. But then came the real game changer, Buffalo Bill Cody. This man basically invented frontier showbiz. In 1873, he started staging exhibitions that mixed rodeo tricks with theatrical reenactments of frontier life. Think of it as the Marvel Cinematic Universe of the 19th century, complete with rope tricks, sharpshooting, and cowboys versus Indians storylines that were wildly popular and, let's be honest, wildly stereotypical. Native Americans were often brought in to perform in full regalia, usually playing the villains in these dramatized battles. Problematic? Oh, absolutely, but at the time, audiences loved it. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show didn't just tour the U.S., it went international. He took cowboys, sharpshooters, trick riders, and Native American performers all the way to Europe, where they dazzled crowds who thought America was basically one big cowboy movie. Queen Victoria herself reportedly attended one. Imagine explaining to the Queen of England that the height of American culture was a guy lassoing a calf in record time. Back home, rodeos grew even bigger. By the 1920s, the sport was so popular that the Rodeo Association of America was formed to organize competitions, set rules, and hand out real prizes. What started as a bunch of dusty ranch hands betting on who could stay in the saddle longer had become a legit sport. Cowboys weren't just workers anymore. They were celebrities, complete with fans, posters, and reputations that stretched across the frontier. But the appeal wasn't just the competition. Rodeos gave settlers a chance to celebrate cowboy life at a time when the wild and Wild West was disappearing. The railroads were expanding, cities were growing, and barbed wire was ending the open range lifestyle. Watching a rodeo was like catching one last glimpse of the rugged frontier before it slipped into history. So let's recap. Rodeos started as bored cowboys trying to impress each other, became spectator sports, and then exploded into full-blown show business thanks to Buffalo Bill. They mixed danger, skill, and a whole lot of dust into something people couldn't get enough of. And while today we see rodeos as a sport, back then they were also nostalgia, living proof that the cowboy way of life was still alive and kicking even as the frontier was closing. In other words, the rodeo was the Wild West's way of saying, yeah, we may have railroads and telegraphs now, but we can still ride a bull and shoot a target at 50 yards. Respect. Part 10. Conclusion. Fun frontier style, aka chaos with extra whiskey. So after 9 chapters of Wild West fun, what have we learned? Mainly that frontier folks had 2 modes, survive or find the weirdest possible way to distract themselves from surviving, and honestly, they nailed it. Think about it. Today, when you want entertainment, you fire up Netflix or scroll TikTok until your brain turns to soup. But in the 1800s, your options ranged from buying snake oil medicine that doubled as an instant colon cleanse, watching grown adults freeze on stage pretending to be statues, attending minstrel shows that were equal parts catchy music and catastrophic racism, cheering while 2 men boxed each other into early retirement, sometimes refereed by a white freaking Earp, packing a picnic basket to watch your neighbor swing from a rope, family bonding at its finest, losing your last paycheck in poker, while praying Doc Holliday didn't cough on you, screaming at elephants and bearded ladies in a circus tent that smelled like hay, sweat, and questionable life choices, running foot races in cowboy boots, throwing axes at trees, or betting on chickens to peck each other to death. And finally, watching cowboys turn their day job into rodeos so thrilling, they ended up touring Europe. Honestly, the Wild West didn't need Netflix. It was Netflix, just bloodier, dustier, and with more livestock. What makes it even funnier is how little has changed. Medicine shows, we've still got sketchy ads for miracle supplements. Living picture shows, congratulations. You've just described Instagram thirst traps. Minstrel shows. Sadly, racism in entertainment didn't vanish. It just changed costumes. Boxing still a billion-dollar industry. Gambling, ever heard of Las Vegas? Circuses? Sure, we replaced elephants with Cirque du Soleil acrobats, but the spirit's the same. Sports? Don't even get me started. Americans still treat baseball like holy scripture. And rodeos? They're alive and well, complete with cowboy hats and bull riding championships on TV. See, the Wild West wasn't really wild because of outlaws and shootouts. It was wild because of how far people were willing to go just to entertain themselves. When life is harsh, boring, and mostly dirt-colored, you grab onto anything that makes you forget for a few hours. Even if that means betting on which guy falls off a horse first or paying to see Jesse James's corpse. And maybe that's the lesson here. Humans are endlessly creative when it comes to 2 things, survival and entertainment. On the frontier, those 2 things often overlapped. Sometimes your medicine show tonic helped with your fever, or at least knocked you unconscious. Sometimes your poker winnings bought you a new horse. Sometimes your shooting contest practice meant you didn't miss when a rattlesnake got too close. Fun and survival weren't separate. They were 2 sides of the same coin. Of course, if you time traveled back and asked a cowboy, hey, what do you do for fun? He probably wouldn't say, yes, I attend living picture shows and rodeos for cultural enrichment. More likely, he'd shrug, spit some tobacco, and say, whiskey cards and not dying, which honestly is still a solid life philosophy. So the next time you complain that you're bored because Netflix doesn't have anything new, just remember, 150 years ago, your ancestors were out there watching public executions and calling it entertainment. Suddenly scrolling TikTok at 2 a.m. doesn't seem so bad. The Wild West proving once and for all that fun has always been messy, questionable, and just a little bit unhinged. And thank God for that, because otherwise history would be boring and you wouldn't be here reading this.